He's zoned out.
All right, zoned out.
We're gonna talk about some game-changing tools here, and we're gonna find a better way. That incidentally, the head on that bolt is 16 millimeter, which is just like 5/8.
What is that little one?
You know, so an 8 millimeter, huh?
What's this little one?
That's it. It's 16, that other one's 17.
This one's
One of those is 17, one's 16. The normal size you'd expect on a bolt bend bolt is a 10 millimeter, 1.5 thread pitch, is gonna be a 17 millimeter. That one there came out of some kit or something, and a wrench that you would expect doesn't fit that one. It'll throw you. See, and you remember what I was talking about, Asian cars will typically have 12 and 14s for 8 and 10 millimeter bolts, and German cars and American cars will have, 13 and 15, which are our things. But anyway, sometimes we have to come up with a better tool to do a job. And back in the day, whenever I was working at the Lincoln dealership, we had these, this is what the cars looked like that I was working on at the Lincoln dealership in the early 80s. And what you had to do in order to put this one in self-test, because it had fuel injection and it had a crank sensor and this kind of thing, the distributor, if you pull the distributor cap off of it, there was nothing in there except a rotor. It had no wires going to it except the plug wires. And but anyway, this right here was the MAP baro sensor. You had to put a hose on here, and you had to pull 10 inches of vacuum on that hose. I could actually put it on there and do it this way, and that put it in self-test. And then it would start going back and forth with the thermactor air solenoids, and I had a box that I built that I had some wires on there, little cantankerous old Lincolns here. And what I would do was that's going to be another box I'm going to show you. What I do, I have a box with some lights on it, and when it flashed back and forth, they would go click, 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 and it'd flash while it was in self-test, and then the lights would go boom, boom, boom together, and then they would flash out whatever code it had. Now, I didn't know of a box that Ford built to get codes out of that car. They sort of provided it, a little 2-digit code thing. But anyway, I built something like with lights and stuff like that from Radio Shack and plugged it in, and I'd put them in self-test, and I'd troubleshoot them. I kept that box for years. I don't know whatever happened to it, but anyway, I built a project box with 4 sets of LEDs that would indicate the transmission shift solenoid activity on a 4EAT transaxle, beating the transmission guy up. And we found out the PCM was the cause of the problem after he rebuilt the unit. What we did was, I got my little box here, and I put these little LED lights in it. And I hooked the box was powered up from the battery, and it had these 4 LED lights that went to the shift solenoid. So the shift solenoid assembly is in here. So I back probed in here into those wires coming out of the engine controller, pins 27, 1, 53, and 54. And I went by this chart. See this chart right here? It's basically telling you this is good for you transmission people. It happens, of course, nobody in here, the afternoon guys are doing transmission. But anyway, see how when you're in reverse, the only solenoid that's on is the 3/4 solenoid. I always thought that on a transmission shift, maybe the first, second, and third, or fourth solenoids ought to come on and it shifted gears. That ain't the way that works. These are all over the map. And I'm going to show you how it works, I guess. This is what you got. In park, that one's on. In reverse, that one's on. In neutral, that one's on. But when you're in first, these two are on, 2 and 3. Then when you're in second, 1, 2, and 3 are on. When you're in third, nothing but 1's on. When you're in OD lockup, 1, 3, and 4 are on. It's a crazy thing. But you have to have this chart in order to build a box to successfully determine if these shift solenoids are doing what they're supposed to do. And we turned out that the engine controller itself was not operating the shift solenoid the right way. You might also notice as you look back at the engine, at the schematic on that the engine controller was feeding power to the solenoids, which is an Asian thing. Nissan hard bodies and stuff do that same thing. Now the other thing, like on some of the Continentals that had air suspension on them, the solenoids were hardwired to ground and fed with power from their line, which was unusual there. But anyway, all right. So then there's the bent wrenches. Anybody ever bent a wrench to make it work right? This is in my toolbox drawer at home. Some of the wrenches I got that I bent for various different jobs. I've bent that one a couple of times. But anyway, don't modify a wrench that belongs to somebody else. I'll cut a wrench off. I'll just do all kinds of crazy stuff here. Sometimes whenever you got to do that, if you get to the point where you think there's nothing I can get on this with, and you think, well, if I had a wrench that was this long, or if I had a wrench that was that angle, I keep some Chinese-made wrenches around there where I can take my, put it in a vise and heat it up with a torch and bend it just like it needs to be so I can get on it and you get your work done that way. I got a call from a guy way up north that was working on an Asian vehicle that wouldn't start, he done some drilling and torch work on a broken bolt down there. I said, scope the cam and crank sensors. He had a scope, but he didn't want to fool with using it. This guy was in Pennsylvania. All right, so he worked on another 2 or 3 weeks, and then he found out there was a tooth broke off of this crank wheel. Would he have found that with a scope? Just like that. He'd have found it in a flash. So we'll figure that. All right, so the old days when we were attacking drivability issues and looking at engine-related stuff, before computers became more of a thing, we checked the ignition timing. We rule out one possibility. We look at the points, you know, the points in the plugs. How many people are talking about putting points and plugs in a car? Are y'all too young for that? Points and plugs. The breaker points are like what you're seeing in this distributor right here. Those little points that open and close and fire the coil. When that block wears out or the points burn up, and that condenser goes bad, runs out. The distributor wears out, the shaft's moving, and that's causing the, you know, because when you close the points up, you know, you're changing the timing too a little bit. So anyway, a lot of stuff going on there. Anyway, we check cylinder compression the same rate. We can do a running compression test on each cylinder, recording the results as we go at idle, throttle, snap, to find mechanical issues related to compression. Now this is your engine stuff, okay, you get that? We're using a test to rule something out. The in-cylinder compression waveform can be used the same way, using a scope. Now what you got right here, the red and blue humps are drawn to represent the valve overlap right here. The purple humps were drawn by the scope of the single cylinder. You got your little pressure transducer in one cylinder, and your scope is actually reading the pressure in that one cylinder while the engine's running. Okay, so you're usually going to have from 60 to 90 psi on one, depending on how the engine's configured while it's running. You'll have higher compression when you're just spinning it over with the gauge in here with a good strong battery and throttle open. And so basically you're going to mark it like this right here. I'm going to have a whole presentation on this so that you guys can look at these scope patterns. You seen these scope patterns before? Like that? They all do that over there a lot, you know? Okay, and so basically what is this right here? What's that hump? Whichever cylinder you've got the transducer screwed in, top dead center compression stroke. That, I mean, that's where you're going to start, right? All right, this right here, you're looking at degrees down here. All right, and this little plateau here, you see this right here is right before the exhaust valve opens. When the exhaust valve opens, you got a little plateau while it's pushing that exhaust out the exhaust valve. All right, then this overlap is really hard to say exactly where that is because you got both valves open at the same time right there, and that purges the rest of the exhaust gas out. And then down here, while you got your piston starting, I mean, you know, the intake valve is opening right here, and you've got low pressure here because it's pulling that air in, and then it goes back into the tank. So if you can look at this right here and you understand what you're looking at, you can determine if you've got some sort of a breathing problem with that. You know, the exhaust valve's open. If this spikes up or humps up right here, that means you've got exhaust restriction. Isn't that useful information if you got exhaust restriction? You remember, I've told the story on YouTube a few times about this buddy of mine that had a little 6-cylinder car that wouldn't start, and he was a really good mechanic too, and he was fighting with that thing, and it was beating him up, and he said, it's got spark, it's got compression, it's in time, it's got fuel, the fuel is good fuel. He says, I don't understand why this car won't start, it ought to start. And I said, pull 3 of the spark plugs out, which, you know, he pulled 3 of the spark plugs out of one bank, and it fired up the 3 spark plugs out. He said, what the heck does that mean? I said, it means your exhaust is stopped up. Something he never considered. You couldn't breathe. You see what I'm saying? All right. Now, a lot of engine control modules, see, that's exhaust problem right there. See how that little hump was supposed to be a little plateau and it kind of went up? When you get to where you get used to looking at these, it's really, really handy to be able to do a cylinder compression thing. And you notice how they've got the degrees down here too? Top dead center, bottom dead center, top dead center on the exhaust, bottom dead center. See, the higher it went up toward top dead center, the more the exhaust restriction showed up on that right there. This one right here, sometimes they'll report the wrong cylinders. If the wrong cylinders reported, you can waste precious time. Like if you get a PO, you know, 305 code, it may be the companion cylinder sometimes, you know, it's a screwed up mess sometimes. The misfire cylinder can, if you know how to do it, be identified with a first look sensor in the tailpipe. First look sensor is a sensor that I've got that comes with this misfire detective, and you can use it for other things too. It's real sensitive. you put it in the tailpipe, hook up the misfire detective, and with it skipping, you know how your exhaust is going puff, 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 puff when it's skipping? It actually is measuring that, and you've got your, you on your number one, you're syncing to number one. Of course, the software will let you sync to any of them. And it's basically knowing where that puff is happening, because the puff is in the whole exhaust stream at the same time. And it can tell you a lot of the time where the thing is skipping. You got to run several tests to get it right. But then this one we got a PO306. This is the waveform on the misfiring cylinder. Now let's compare it to a good cylinder on the same engine. See how it's supposed to look? You got that? Well, look at that one there. Now I will tell you something else too. You see this right here and that right there? See those? They should be even. This is intake. This right here is at the end of the compression stroke. Atmospheric pressure. This is atmospheric pressure right here. This is slightly higher than atmospheric pressure. If that and that don't line up with each other, you've got a problem. Okay? Alright, so see what's going on with the suspect cylinder. It should look like this, it looks like that, that's your exhaust. Alright? Now, actually that wasn't quite true. The zero pressure line is not right there. It's actually right here. That's not marked right. The atmospheric pressure line is down here. Okay. Alright, so point A is top dead center. And point B is where the exhaust valve open. But see right there, like that right there, where that one is, those two ought to line up just like I said. Far enough to let exhaust gas escape. Know how the pressure changes direction at B. See it? All the way down, exhaust valve open, it goes up. It's a little bit higher than atmospheric pressure because it's got to push the exhaust out through the open exhaust valve. Alright, and so when you compare that, you know, that gives you an idea of what's going on there. Alright, analyzing the waveform on a bad cylinder, you know, that's how you got pressure should be bouncing to zero, it's not doing that, and you got clogged exhaust runner. Pressure couldn't escape. That's what it looked like right there. Like I say, they call this a vacuum state, but actually, like I say, that right there is atmospheric pressure. You know, it's relatively. So the green trace is in cylinder pressure. All right, intake, compression, and exhaust pressure scoped on no start. How many cylinders does this engine have? Can you look at it and tell? What does that say?
6.
Okay, and what's the firing order? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? All right. The pink markers are the dividing pressure waveforms from one. This is the cylinder right here, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, so the dividing the pressure waveform by the number of cylinders contained within the engine. Okay, now you're only measuring it on one cylinder, right? But you can actually look at these exhaust wave, yellow face exhaust pressure to tailpipe. So you can basically look at that one. How many blue humps am I seeing?
4.
How many should I be seeing?
6.
Is that good information? Actually, it is. That's good information, right? Okay. Look at the blue trace. The screen's been divided into 6 separate boxes. The first box has I3, intake cylinder number 3, and E4, exhaust cylinder number 4. Each box is marked. Problem with the pattern, it should be 6 intake pulses instead of 6 exhaust pulses. We only see 4. The intake and exhaust camshafts have been installed backwards on that one. It was a no start, came in on the hook. Got that? All right, note that only one cylinder, number 3, is being checked by the compression transducer. That's a really important thing to notice. You see, that's a cool way of looking at that, and to be perfectly honest, you might not find that. When I was at that Craig Van Vattenberg school up there, there was a Ford Escape hybrid that had a 4-cylinder engine in it, and it hadn't. They'd done all kinds of stuff trying to get it started. It wouldn't start. I mean, other shops had worked on all that kind of stuff. And the guy, he put some of the guys in the class to work on that, and they used a picoscope with a transducer and checking the spark, and they found out that it was out of time. The crank was out of time with the camshaft. On that one, you actually have to take a bolt out, take a little plug out and put a bolt in there so that it locates the crankshaft. And they actually couldn't find the hole where the crankshaft location was supposed to be because it wasn't in line. When the cam was lined up, the crank was out of line. That's what the deal was on that one, last I heard. Anyway, so you create you a chart with the right number of cylinders. You got a 4-cylinder engine, then you do it for 4-cylinder, make it simple. Run a dynamic compression test. This little dynamic is when the engine's running, right? Okay, it can be used to pinpoint the cause of a misfire when all the usual tests return normal results. So it's also used by performance tuners to verify each cylinder is contributing equally to the engine's power output. So, first you get you a static compression test. That's whenever you screw the, and each, you pull all the plugs out, you screw the compression gauge in there, you hold the throttle wide open, you go, like that, and you let it puff up like 6 puffs, you're gonna see what your compression is. Get your static right here. All right, now you start by doing this static compression test. I'll install all the plugs except the cylinder you're testing. Ground that plug wire to prevent module damage. Always ground the plug wire to prevent module damage, because if you just let the spark go pop, 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 Now I will tell you the coil-on plug, like Ford's have, are not as susceptible to that as some of the other ones, but matter of fact, Ford has you turn those upside down, put a scope onto them so they don't have anywhere to fire to, and then you can look at a stress test on the coil. That's a crazy thing. That's counterintuitive if you work on electronic ignition for a long time, because you can fry your ignition module in a big way by just letting the plug wire jump without, without being short of the ground. All right, so disconnect the injector on that cylinder. Install your compression tester. It can be done with a Schrader valve remove. Most of them like leaving the valve in there and burp it every 5 or 6 puffs. Start it and take an idle reading, usually just above idle at a consistent 1200 RPM. Record the result. There's your idle reading, right there. Now from 1200 RPM, snap it to 2500 and release it real quickly, and on a ride, record the result. See that? Cylinder 1, static 150. I'll see the difference in the pressure you're going to get when it's running and when it's idling. All right, now then, in this example, cylinder number 1's got a snap test reading. It's lower than the other cylinders. It should have jumped more than that. If the snap reading's low, that's less than 80% cranking compression, look for air intake problems. Carbon deposits on intake valve, worn cam lobe, worn valve guides or spring, rocker or push rod problems, shutter valve misposition in the runners of an intake variable runner system. There's all kinds of different runners, shutters in the runners now to lengthen and shorten the runners, and I got a manifold up there that's basically got some that close up and causes the hole to be smaller going in, so the air will go faster into the cylinder and all that. Anyway, so let me see. Come on. Number 4 in this example has got a higher than normal snap reading test, and if the snap measurement's higher, over 80% of cranking compression, it means the air's not leaving the cylinder efficiently. You'll look on the exhaust side of the cylinder: worn cam lobe, clogged exhaust, bent push rod, oil, collapsed lifter. If the readings are all high, look for exhaust restrictions such as a clogged catalytic converter or muffler. That basically is trying to get out of there and it's getting trapped. Remember how we had the little rising hump when the exhaust valve was open? That's what that was about. In this example, number 2 has low idle and snap test reading. These type of, remember, it's just compression leaks, wherever it might be. Now, one time we had this little Honda car that we were going to pull a motor out of it or put a different motor in it. They said the motor was blowing in the little Honda car. And it sounded normal spinning over. So let's do a compression test. We had no compression on cylinder number 4. You'll have fun with this one. No compression on cylinder number 4. Put the cylinder leakage tester in there. We had no cylinder leakage either. No cylinder leakage, no compression. And spinning it over, it sounded like a normal motor spinning over. I'll let you think about that one for a while. But this is a true story. And you know what I did when we were doing that? They said, what does that mean? I said, well, we got to pull this motor out. Let's go pull it out. Well, when we pull it out, it turned out that somebody had tacked that thing up, redlined it to the point where it threw a rod, and the crank was spinning so fast it busted the bottom of the rod off, and it knocked a hole in the block and threw the bottom of the rod out, and the piston was still in the cylinder, but it wasn't moving. That was a peculiar thing. All right, so will the engine, now that there's no start, will the engine spin over normally and have even sounding compression? Whenever you go out there with no start, you're going to listen to it go, is it going, or is it going, if it's making a funky, strange noise and spinning over, likely you ain't got no compression on it. Be careful about that, because I used to get these cars that they moved around a lot at car lots, like little 4-cylinders with low tension rings on them, like these newer cars I've got. And back in the day, whenever they had high tension rings and one had been sitting there long enough, the cylinder walls had been washed down, there was no wall on them, it would spin over. You ever heard an engine you're trying to start, it's been sitting up, spin real slow, just saying, what in the world's wrong with this, When you put some wall down in there, let it start mixing around and start spinning faster and it gets better compression. Now, these other ones, when it washes the cylinder walls down, because they crank it up, it's running rich, they go in and park it in a different spot, they switch it off. Next day, he says, Johnny, go move that car back over here, because I think more people will see it. They move it back over here, and they go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And because they don't ever let it get warm, it starts fouling the spark plugs. And then it washes the cylinders down, because it won't start, and they just keep spinning, spinning, spinning. And when the cylinder walls are washed down on one of the low piston ring, low tension piston rings, it's going to sound like it ain't got no compression at all. And you're going to swear the timing belt jump. When I used to see them, if it was one of the little Ford Contours or one of the Mazda 626 or something, what I do is I pull all the plugs out. The first time I ran into that, I pulled the timing cover off. I said, well, this thing ain't out of time. What's up with this? And so you put a bunch of oil in each one of the cylinders and let it get some compression, it'd fire right up. Spark plugs usually fouled out. If you see one like that and you pull a plug out and it's all greasy and fouled, likely they never really get warm when they start it up. That's bad all the way around because it sludges up the engine too. Because you're making water, some of it goes by, mixes with the oil, you wind up with sludge over. Bad plan. If the compression is uneven, look for timing belt issues. Uneven compression would mean compression on some cylinders. You can hear one over there. If you're standing in a parking lot, you may hear somebody start a car. And they'll go, it speeds up when that cylinder ain't squeezing air goes up. And when it fires up, when it drives out, if you're standing there, you hear it skipping out the exhaust pipe. And you know what's wrong. You got low compression on one cylinder just by listening. Just listen to what you've got going on. You hear the fuel pump? If you hear the fuel pump, you already know some things. To begin with, you know the engine controller. You hadn't even plugged your scan tool in yet. But you turn on, you hear the fuel pump? I know the engine controller is awake because the engine controller is what operates the fuel pump for 2 seconds when you switch a key on. If I switch it on, I hear the fuel pump. I know the computer's talking. I know it's awake. It's really important information. So I know probably if I plug my scan tool in, the computer is going to talk. If I turn on the key and I don't hear the fuel pump, I could have a computer that's awake, but I could have one that's dead because of, engine controller relay or something like that. If you hear the fuel pump, the computer's awake, does it have fuel pressure? If I hear the fuel pump, does it have fuel pressure? If it doesn't have fuel pressure, but you hear the fuel pump, what do you do next? Remember what we did with our meter. Set it on amps, pull the fuel pump relay, let the fuel pump be fed from the common terminal on the relay, it's hot, to the wire going out to the pump. I'm going to let that thing run, let's put the meter on amps and measure how much current that fuel pump's pulling. You remember that? We did that out here. What do we have? If you got 1.5 amps, it's out of gas. Put some gas in it, comes up to 4 to 6 amps. Now it's pumping fuel. That's typically what you're going to have there is whenever somebody, like the gas gauge is lined and they're driving it with it reading full, like on that blue one we got out here. What happened there was everybody was driving it and nobody realized that nobody had filled it up. It was always reading full. So she runs out of gas between here and Elba, because it was out of that. And then of course, now we've got other issues we've got to deal with, but what was that? If the fuel pump's running, there's nothing but air in the fuel rail. See how much amperage the fuel pump's consuming. 1.5 amps spinning drive, 4 to 8 amps pumping fuel. Does it have spark and injector pulse? Typically, if it has no injector pulse, it will also have no spark. Right? However, I have seen, I went over there one day to the Chevrolet place and this guy was working on a 99 model Oldsmobile Aurora or something. And he was saying, well, I'm going to put this, he was measuring a crank sensor. He had an RPM signal, but he didn't have any injector pulse, but he had spark. And he said, well, I'm going to put this ignition module on it. I said, wait a minute, what are you doing that for? He said, well, I don't know. And I said, well, wait a minute, you got spark, you got an RPM signal on your scan tool, but you got no injector pulse. Why is ignition module going to cause that? I mean, if you sorted this out, looked at the schematic. Well, let's go look at the schematic. So look at the schematic, and as I remember, this has been 15 years ago, I went over there and I said, these injectors don't have any power feed them. Where did that come from? And we traced it back to a relay over there. We pulled the relay out, and he hooked his meter up to the relay, and it was wide open. The coil on it was. And while he was holding it, you tap that coil with your thumb, and it would go away. And I said, this thing needs a relay. It didn't need a $200 ignition module. It needed a $5 relay. That's all it needed. Well, see, if you're thinking clearly, you can surgically sort things out and fix stuff. Check the PCM for RPM signal. pull up the scan tool, do I have an RPM signal? Do I not? See, engine performance and engine repair are interlaced. See what I'm saying? All right. So what do we need to know to get to the point where we know something? Gather your data and determine what's not wrong. I gotta know what it is not. If it's got even compression, I'm gonna know that if it's a no start, you know, or if it's even running really bad, you know, compression is really important. Is the battery healthy? Is the base engine healthy? Adam was talking this morning about the one that they were saying that somebody thought it was the starter this morning. Did y'all hear about that? Well, was it the starter?
Mm.
What was it?
The battery cutter.
Loose battery cables. One of the guys that I got working over at Enterprise, this transmission shop had rebuilt a transmission on a Power Stroke diesel, and it was doing all kinds of crazy transmission stuff. And they just run out of ideas, the transmission shop did, so they sent it up there to him, because, you know, he's at Ford place. Furthermore, he's like Superman, ain't nothing he can't fix, you know. But, you know, of course, I trained him, but, you know, after all. But anyways, but, you know what he found wrong with that Power Stroke diesel transmission problem? Loose battery cable. I mean, it has two batteries, you know what I mean, but the battery cables were nasty and loose, and I don't remember what the symptom was, but when he cleaned the battery terminal, got it on there, got it tight, that transmission problem was gone, whatever the transmission problem was. And do we have fuel in sufficient pressure and quantity, and is the fuel good? You can have, there was a Dodge truck that came in here one day, the guy said, I filled up my truck with gas, I didn't go hardly 2 blocks, it went dead on me. So I brought the truck in here, checked everything out, everything's good, pulled some fuel out of it. Smelled good, looked good. I don't see anything wrong with this fuel. So what we did was I got a container and energized the fuel pump and let it just completely empty the gas tank, because sometimes you'll see water like that. See what I mean? Like if you don't completely empty the gas tank, you look down in your container, you have a clean container you put it in, you'll see water. I've done that and found water in them before. This one here didn't have no water in it. But the gas looked and smelled really good. I mean, I actually kept some of it for a long time. You could smell of it, it smelled good, it felt like gas, it looked like gas, it was, you know, I couldn't see anything wrong with it. Well, we took some gas out of our tanker, fired up. You know what I mean? I mean, don't go throwing a bunch of parts at it until you make sure you got good fuel. Yeah, make sense? Do we have strong spark and injector operation? Click, 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 click. You know, you hear the injectors clicking. Do we have a clean, not foul spark plug? If the spark plugs are wet, the spark's going to run on the wet. It's not going to jump across the gap. And if it's running on the wet, not jumping across the gap, you're going to have a no start. If they're wet, was it wet because they cranked it and didn't let it warm up? Or is it wet because of some other reason? Some vehicles won't start with bad cam sensor. You can take a Nissan Altima and you can unplug the cam sensor on the end of the head, and it may start and it may not. Isn't that something? I actually saw a Nissan Altima one time that was some Nissan dealership had replaced the cam sensor for some reason up the country, and they were still having trouble with it. Right down here, I put a scope on it, and you would swear by looking at that scope pattern and comparing it to a good one that it was out of time. The engine was out of time, but it had a metal timing chain on it. Those kind don't typically jump time like that. And I said, doggone it, this is not making any sense. And you know, checking things out, compression's good and all that. And I told Brett just on a whim, I said, send me a cam sensor for a Nissan Altima. You know, because you go unplug it, it might start and it might not, one of them kind of thing. So put a cam sensor in there, plugged it in, they're going, good to go. And it actually fixed the scope pattern too. Craziest thing ever, they didn't know what was possible. All right. Yeah, you need to make work order. They didn't finish it up. I pulled them off your truck, so you could wait a while.
There you go.
Yeah. All right, you got that? All right, here's what you got. If your heart's not in it, you're gonna fail at whatever you do. If you're only here because you feel like you have to be and you don't want to be, you're gonna fail. Right? So remember, performance, attitude, integrity, and dependability. Performance means you can get the work done, get it done quick. Integrity means they can trust you to do well. Attitude means you got a good attitude. I put up one guy that wasn't even really ready. He begged me to put him. I'll be here in a minute to get you a work order maybe. But anyway, what the deal was, this one guy had such a good attitude. At this one dealership I put him at, he couldn't fix much of anything, but they loved the guy because he had a good attitude. Hey, can you help us with this? Yeah, man, let's do it. He was like that, you know? Yeah, let's go. Now, you know, I don't think he made all that much money because he didn't perform worth a flip. He wasn't really ready. He wasn't really ready to go into the field, but he begged me and begged me and begged me to put him in a co-op job. And he found out that he wasn't ready when he went over there. But anyway, but they liked him. They didn't fire him. He stayed. He bought him a toolbox, and he made some pretty decent money for a while. Integrity. That's, I mean, you do the work. That means that